Akkor próbálnánk elkezdeni ezt a mai rendezvényünket egy kis csúszással. Arra kérek mindenkit, hogy mint egy rendes színházban helyezkedjen el, nem sok sikerrel. Most már teljes sikerrel. Köszöntjük Önöket a Republikon Intézet konferenciáján. Ennek a mai konferenciának két egymással egyáltalán nem összekapcsolódó témája van, és ezért elnézést, hogyha itt esetleg az első körben és a második körben más-más érdeklődés van, de engem mind a kettő érdekel, ez persze kevés, de remélem, hogy azért Önöket is. Az első körben a konferencia nemzetközi részében az illiberalizmus térnyeréséről szeretnénk beszélgetni a régióban. Számomra, mint a magyar liberális hagyományok őrzőjének egyik intézményeként, a Republikon Intézetének a vezetőjeként borzasztóan fontos és érdekes az, hogy hogyan szorul háttérbe, hogyan válik lassan szitokszóvá a liberalizmus, és hogyan nyer teret egész Európában az illiberalizmusnak nevezett szélsőjobbos, populista, befelé forduló diktatúrák szinte mindenütt. Különösen izgalmasnak tartom a mai konferenciánkon ugye a cseh helyzet elemzését, hiszen Csehországban a hétvégén ugyan várt, de komoly változások következtek be, meglátjuk majd, remélem majd kicsit jobban meg is értjük, hogy ez hova vezet. Tehát az első körben a V4-ek országaiból hallunk egy-egy prezentációt, és utána pedig akkor erről egy rövid panelbeszélgetést, és a második körben pedig a magyar kultúra állapotjáról próbálunk meg valamiféle képet alkotni, képet mutatni önöknek, reményeim szerint keretek között, hát majd meglátjuk, hogy ezt sikerül-e betartani. A mai rendezvényünket, mint annyi mindent mást is a Friedrich Naumann Alapítványnak köszönhetjük, hogy van, és akkor most át is adnám a szót a Richter úrnak, aki itt van, hogy az alapítvány nevében, az alapítvány közép-európai vezetője nevében néhány szót szóljon.
Great, thank you very much. I would switch to English. Very good morning. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. My name is Lars Andre Richter. I'm the head of the Office Central Europe of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom. Maybe one sentence about the Naumann Foundation. I think many of you know us, know the foundation. The foundation is a German non-profit organization, but with an international profile. We are close to the Liberal Party in Germany, and we are doing political education, fostering a democratic, republican, market economy environment. We have been doing that in Germany, in West Germany. We were founded in West Germany, in post-war West Germany in the 1950s, to re-establish democracy. And we have meanwhile worldwide about nearly 40 offices, many here in Central and Eastern Europe, Northern Africa, Latin America. So we are represented worldwide, and we cooperate in our respective countries with other institutions. So Prague office or the Central European office is based in Prague, and we are in charge of our political educational activities in the 4 Visegrádi states, which are represented here this morning, plus in Slovenia. So we are in charge of 5 countries, much work, but yeah, we have many outstanding partners. Republikon here in Hungary is one of them. Very, very proud and thankful for the cooperation. Yeah, thank you very much again for being with us, for following the invitation. And yeah, let's enjoy the conference, the seminar. Thank you very much for the attention.
Good morning and welcome everyone. I will be moderating the first panel. My name is Máté Hajba, and the first panel will be about illiberalism in the V4 countries. Our distinguished guests are sitting in the front row right now because they are going to have a presentation, and it's much more convenient for them not to break their necks looking at the screen, but later on they will join me on the stage and we'll have a lively discussion. Our distinguished guests are Andrej Schulz from Institute Martina Filka from Slovakia, Andrej Prendke from the Economic Freedom Foundation in Poland, Lars-Andrej Richter from FNF Central Europe, who will have to leave early, so please excuse him if he stands up and leaves. And Márton Schlanger from Republikon Institute and Zuzana Stušlikova from European Institute for European Policy in the Czech Republic. And I'm sorry if I butchered the names of our distinguished guests. So as I mentioned in the beginning, each of the panelists will have a presentation about their countries and the recent elections or the recent political situation in the countries, and then we'll have a discussion about the whole region with regards to illiberalism. So without further ado, I would like to ask Zuzana to have her presentation about the most recent Czech elections.
Thank you, Mate, and thank you for that. Thank you, everyone, for coming so early in the morning. I really appreciate that there is such a big crowd. My name is Zuzana. I lead the Green team at European, but as it is of recently, it's really difficult to avoid the election. So we're all kind of turning our analyst hat on and looking at what is happening, because in all the policy fields, the changes seem to be rather significant that are upcoming. So a little bit about the situation pre-election. Basically, the government was one of the most stable ones that Czechia has seen since the revolution in 1989. It was only the second one that managed to last for the full term, so no early elections. It was a center-right government that was, towards the end, extremely unpopular because it was blamed for the rise of the cost of living, energy prices and so on, things that we know were happening across Europe and that were mostly linked to the situation after the full-scale invasion to Ukraine. That being said, of course, there were also many things that didn't go well on the domestic policy side. So what kind of marked the end of the outgoing government was a huge dissatisfaction of their own voters. So basically, what we've seen in this electoral campaign, and on the right, you can see the election model or the polls, what the statistics told us 6 months ahead of the elections. Basically, the main opposition party, ANO, was, since the beginning of the year, tipped off to win the elections, with Spolu, the leading party of the current coalition, was always at least 10% behind. That basically means that what we've seen as the result of the election, and I will get a better graph of it later on, was not really surprising. So if we look at the graph, basically the predictions were fairly accurate. And the biggest drama, what we were expecting around the election, was how many parties will actually manage to overpass the 5% threshold, because there were basically 2-3 of them at different times that would make it or wouldn't make it to the Chamber of Deputies. And the situation is such that, yes, I might come to this later, that's not the most important thing of it, but there were, of course, in the past half year, each party had their affairs, each party had their low points, each party had something to laugh at. The problem that we've seen on the center-right part of the spectrum was that the problems came much, much closer to the elections, whereas on the side of ANO and Andrej Babiš, we've seen that basically the longest and the biggest outstanding case is the kind of subsidy fraud, where he is again standing in a trial that's been returned for like the 5th time. It's a huge one. He could end up in prison potentially. But at the same time, it's been going on for so long that nobody really cares at this point. What actually made waves is that, I've put it there, it was a threat to murder a dog from one of the frontrunners of the party. And that actually threatened to actually have an impact in the elections, not the outstanding subsidied fraud. This is the actual results, what we've seen. And I've put here a comparison with the 2021 election so that you would see a little bit of a shift. We've seen that there were parties that ran together in 2021, then they decided to go separately. That's more the liberal part of the spectrum, when the Mayors and Independent and the Pirates run together last time, and they weren't able to agree on anything this time. So basically, we had two parties. It turned out to work well for them because they had 15% last time, and they managed to get 20% of the vote this time. But it was not only because they would be more attractive individually, but also because there was a big part of the voters who originally voted for Spolu, the leading center-right coalition that had the prime minister until, well, still has, of the government in the mission. And the dissatisfied voters of the leading coalition went to the smaller, yet still liberal parties. So this was the movement that we've seen. Altogether, basically, the biggest difference between 2021 and 2025 was not really a big shift of voters. So basically, already in 2021, we knew that it was almost a miracle that the center-right coalition got the overall majority, and it was largely due to the fact that more than 1 million votes didn't count because they didn't go to the parties that met the threshold. So there was basically like 1/5 of all the votes casted in the previous elections that kind of didn't have a representation. And the parties knew it. So basically on the extreme, in some cases definitely extreme, right and left parts, two coalitions were formed this time. It was the Statulo on the left, with the Communist Party leading it, but getting rid of the highly unpopular label of communist. And on the right side, it was SPD, which has nothing to do with the German SPD. Some of the voters in Czechia even don't know that. It's quite funny when there were the latest German elections and their voters were like, oh my God, SPD is doing so well. Very different story. So in the Czech side, this is really extreme right, and they managed to get also the fraction parties on the far right to join them, and therefore avoided this like huge loss of voting potential. So basically, what we've seen this year is ANO getting, and yeah, one more thing. So ahead of the elections, and I will go back to it. Ahead of the elections, we've seen that Statulo, the extreme left, was around 7%. Eventually, they didn't make the 5% threshold, which was seen as one of the positive surprises of the elections, that the extreme left didn't make it. On the extreme right, it was predicted to be much, much more successful than it eventually ended up. But it seems that people eventually got afraid of the extreme solutions that those parties were suggesting, because they were arguing to leave the EU, to leave NATO, and in the current geopolitical situation, this benefited ANO, which was saying, we're also for people, we want to, put Czechia first, but we're not leaving NATO and we're not leaving EU. So it seems like the moderate thinking about things actually prevailed. So this is the overall state of play as of now. As you can see, it is a highly fragmented Chamber of Deputies. It is one of the most fragmented we've seen in the past 30 years. There is a clear majority of ANO with the SPD, which is the extreme right, and motorists, which is populist extreme right, kind of car-obsessed people. Difficult to define them other than populist focusing on cars. So this is the basis for the negotiations that we see right now. I did the presentation on Monday, and my prediction was on Monday that these negotiations are going to take a long time. It seems that things are moving forward actually much quicker than expected. So we already have some names in the public space that seem to be likely to be under coalition. This is not the preferred version of Andrej Babiš. Andrej Babiš really wanted to have a minority government that would be only supported by those two minor parties. But basically they've told him, why would we do that? Because they would have nothing to gain from it. And they have absolutely nothing to lose from actually joining the government, because they underperformed compared to their potential. So what is now the most likely scenario is that ANO will lead it with Andrej Babiš as prime minister, having the support of those two parties, having a comfortable majority of 108 in the 200 people that's going to be there. What's going to be crucial is going to be the role of the president, because he has a right to appoint ministers or not appoint them. And some of the nominations that we're seeing right now are highly controversial. So, for example, to give you an example, Minister of Environment should be a person from the motorists who is openly claiming that he would only take the post to basically boycott everything that's supposed to happen in there. It's not just ETS2, it's literally all the subsidies, everything, renewables, all those things. So the hope is that, you know, and this is, I'm looking at my Slovak colleague, you know, this has happened even in Slovakia, that when you have such an extreme case, the president can actually play a role in that. So we will see how that looks. The next session of the parliament will be on the 3rd of November. So before that, the current government is still in place, and the new government will only be named after that. So realistically, till the end of the year. Here, with my optimism on Monday, I saw 5 scenarios. Now, as I mentioned, I think only the first one, well, no, the second one. Third one, sorry, the 3-party government with SPD is going to be likely represented by affiliated professionals rather than their hardcore members of the far right, because that's another red line that the president put, that he doesn't want in the government people who would actively threaten to leave the EU or NATO. The president is actually himself a former NATO person, so he feels very strongly about this. All the other scenarios are theoretically on the table. They could form a majority, but it seems unlikely at this point. We'll go back to this in the questions, I'm pretty sure, but I just wanted to offer a couple of thoughts on the illiberalism of the new government. It's turning much more to the extreme with the 2 parties, which are under many classifications, actually extreme, motorists and SPD. When it comes to Babiš, we are always a bit cautious to call him illiberal or to call him, you know, extremist. It is very often marked as far right now, as he is a member of the Patriots for Europe. He is in the first place a populist, the purest kind of populist. He's absolutely not ideological in any way, which we can see of him, his political career, where he started as a liberal Renew member, great friends with Macron, like we're all going to be about liberalism. Then he turned into a fairly leftist country, basically draining the votes of the traditional left in Czechia. Then came a huge turn, and all of a sudden he was a conservative and great friends with Viktor Orbán and others. Now he basically is playing the nationalist role and basically saying that, you know, kind of taking inspiration from Trump, saying Czechia first. He basically says he doesn't care about foreign policy. This is the least important thing. We have to focus on what is happening at home. So, you know, to take him as somebody who has a vision that goes beyond his own interest is fairly difficult, and it can be it can bring a sense of hope in a certain situation, absurd as it sounds, because, for example, when we're looking at equality in Czechia, rights of minorities, and so on, we're not at this moment so worried about the deteriorating of the situation. Of course, things can happen, especially in the coalition, but it's not like the primary fear that there is. What is the fear is agrofertization, which is basically named after his company, which is basically saying that he's putting his key people from his companies to different state positions and basically trying to use the network as it was, but it's something that the current government tried to fight with and was extremely unsuccessful. So this is something that, again, rather serves his purposes than trying to, you know, just like create an alternative network, even though the outcomes might be very similar. And about the V4 links, we're going to talk later, but this is something that is still a big question mark and after the elections, and we don't really know how the ties with the other V4 leaders are going to play out. And I just wanted to end on a funnier note. You probably all know DG Meme, and they just love the Czech president, so this is what they posted after the Czech elections. So, you know, maybe something to take away.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And from Czechia, we'll move to Slovakia and see the illiberal tendencies there. And we'll later later on what similarities and synergies there might exist between illiberalism in the two countries.
Thank you. And I use this to move ahead, yes? Yes. Okay. Thank you, everybody. I'm Andrej Schulz Andris from Slovakia. I will talk about similarities, but rather than that, contrasts between what we have in Slovakia and what is in the rest of the region, what are assumptions people are making. But before I do that, just to, I don't know to what extent you follow events in Slovakia, so just to bring everybody to the same page, so to speak, just a brief summary. Robert Fico established the Smer party, which means direction, in 1999. Back then he was a young, charismatic, promising social democratic member of parliament. And for most of the past 20 years, he and his power were in power, though with interruptions. And with one exception, always in a coalition with two other parties, and I believe that's rather significant, and one way how it's quite different from what you know in Hungary. There are three parties now in government. One is the original Smer party, one is the Hlas party, which was created as a splinter group, as a challenge to Smer, but then ultimately didn't overperform. So they're the junior partner who also calls themselves Social Democratic, and the Slovak National Party, which is keeps going in and out of parliament. It's like the MIE party was in Hungary in the 90s, but somehow being able to reinvent itself. And in total, these parties are polling at 30 to 35% in total, so not very much, but they may be helped in a future election by the Republika party, which is a very far right, like Mihazánk in Hungary. But that will be a big question if these social democratic parties would be willing to form a government with such a far right party. But that's something for the future. Now, the most recent illiberal news that you may have heard about came only 2 weeks ago, when a constitutional majority was found. So that almost all the government MPs and also some of the opposition MPs, from the Christian Democrats in particular, passed by the narrowest of margins a constitutional amendment. And this constitutional amendment, I don't want to go too much into details, but just the headlines are here, says that the government will from now on only recognize two, quote, biologically defined sexes. Then there's a ban on surrogate motherhood and on gay adoption, or basically it makes adoption outside of marriage very, not completely impossible, but very difficult. Sexual education of children will be mandated by the consent of the parent. And there is a clause about which constitutional lawyers are now arguing whether it is, to what extent it is effective, about the primacy of national law over European or international law in matters of what they call national identity, which is not a very, very strictly defined term. So we will see what will be the application of that. And there may be other things that you have heard about since the election, which was 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago. So now we're midterm through the regular cycle. Since this government came into power, one particular target has been civil society, and also I would include artists, especially independent artists. They have faced all sorts of scandalization, audits. There's a bill, there was a law inspired by Hungary, passed, though not as strict as the one in Hungary. Arguably the strictest part of it is that NGOs, or the big NGOs at least, are now subject to public information requests, which can be a source of big harassment from people who want to do them harm. There has been a lot of defunding of all of these independent initiatives at the Ministry of Culture, Ministry of Justice, and other of these traditional donors. There's a hostility, in addition to all of these targets, also to journalists. The public broadcaster has been taken over by people who were nominated by the government. The private media are exercising some degree of self-censorship, and there have been actually journalists leaving even the private broadcasters and establishing new independent media to counter this, to counter these kinds of pressure. So again, things that I think ring a bell to a Hungarian audience. The biggest reform, perhaps, that this government passed was the criminal law reform, which reduced penalties critics say for many politicians from the government who are being in the process of being charged or there are criminal proceedings being held against them or against their lawyers, allies, business affiliates, and so on. That was passed rather quickly, and that seemed to be the top priority of the first months of the new government. So I could continue with this list, and go into greater detail and just spread a sense of pessimism and so on. But I think you've heard all of that. So instead, in the time that I have remaining, I would like to deal with the differences, because I've heard it many times, and there's a narrative that certainly these people are pushing themselves. They're saying we are the riders of the illiberal apocalypse, and we are knocking on the doors of the European institutions, and these stiff-necked and arrogant European and Brussels-based politicians and NGOs and bureaucrats. We're going to at least make an effort to try to rebuild Europe in a different way. After all, we have the mandate, and the Visegrád 4 will be this kind of avant-garde, if you will, of this movement. However, I do see key differences. And I'm going to actually continue with some of your thoughts on Babiš in this, because it's easy to make assumptions if you only listen to the rhetoric, or if you read the news and go through a list like I showed you. People make assumptions about Slovakia being just like being illiberal and being in the same corner as Hungary and Russia and Serbia and Georgia and so on. And I wouldn't say that that there are no illiberal tendencies. I wouldn't say that in the end the situation will not be a good one. But I would like to show that maybe in order to understand the illiberalism in Slovakia, we have to take it with maybe a grain of salt to understand that it is pragmatical rather than ideological. The biggest difference that I see between Slovakia and Hungary is about power. And I've heard it from many diplomats who maybe cover both countries, for example, that they realize that Fico doesn't have the kind of consolidated rule over the country like Orbán has been able to manage over the similar time. Now, a big part of that is that he has had to have coalition governments, so there were some kind of checks and balances between the different parties, or even during the time. But even regardless of that, even during the time that Smer was ruling alone, we still could see factions within Smer, arguably representing different business interests behind. So there never has been able to have that kind of consolidation as we have seen in Hungary. Peter Pellegrini, currently the president, this is a very famous picture from 2018 when they were shifting hands, when one was resigning as prime minister, handing over to his deputy. He afterwards actually challenged Fico for the leadership, unsuccessfully though, but then he went and created his own party, which for a short while overperformed over Smer, but ultimately, as I had already mentioned, now is the junior partner in the coalition, and Pellegrini became a sort of consolation prize at the president of the country. But that speaks, and they every now and then they have a public conflict, or their parties have a public conflict, so it's not so easy as much as maybe they would wish to do that. And civil society pressure is something that is also very present in Slovakia. This change of hands that occurred in 2018 after the murder of journalist Jan Kuciak would not have been possible after large-scale demonstrations that were taking place. So there's definitely a lesson that Fico and his allies remember. Secondly, much like Babiš in Czechia, Fico is pragmatic. Yes, he was a social democratic prime minister. The party calls itself social democrat, but over those past 20 or 30 years, we have seen him go in different directions. When they established, they used this term borrowed from New Labour, that they would be the third way of Slovak politics. Then they wanted to be in the. Then they had this fight with Orbán actually about Hungarian nationalism. I don't know if anybody here remembers them. Now they're the best of friends, arguably. And in between that, he wanted to. He said that he would be with Macron and with Merkel in the heart of Europe, in the core of Europe. So he's been all over really, and we should not take it too seriously. No, well, nobody really knows what he's actually thinking, but there definitely is not that kind of grand ideological project in Smer that we could, I think, see in Fidesz with Hungary. The most recent one is, yes, they're calling themselves social democrats, but with a distinct Slovak, or if you will, Central European flavor. This combination of being supposedly left-wing on economic issues, but right-wing on social issues. And yes, that we can go on analyzing, and maybe we will in the discussion or afterwards about why this is so. One more thought, my last and most controversial thought, maybe in Slovakia it is harder to do than in some of the other countries in the region. Slovak society, for some of the reasons that I mentioned here, is just more skeptical of grand ideological projects. That was the case during communism. That was the case maybe also in the 90s with economic transformation. That is the case for any kind of nationalist project that the current government may be approaching, and that may be the case for a liberal project in case the opposition wins the next election. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. And now we move to Poland, a country that was very much mentioned alongside with Hungary as the two illiberal countries in Europe, and now it's changed, and with that the Polish-Hungarian historic friendship seems to be changing, but illiberalism by no means gone from Poland. So let's hear about what's going on in Poland.
Thanks, Mate, and hello to everybody. So first things first, I've got to admit that I'm coming here to Budapest not as a winner, but as a loser, because recently my side, the liberal side in Poland, progressive side, democratic side, has lost the presidential election. So I will give you some context into Polish politics. My name is Andrej Babiš. I work for the Economic Freedom Foundation, but also I'm very much actually involved in politics as a vice president of the Nowoczesna party. It's the small liberal party right now in the ruling coalition. And also I serve on the city council of my hometown, Poznań, in Western Poland. But let's get back to Polish politics and what's been going on. Well, like I signaled in the beginning, we have just had our presidential election, where in the second round of the election, Rafał Trzaskowski, the candidate supported by the government, the ruling side in Poland, has shockingly lost to a complete nobody, because Karol Nawrocki, the new Polish president, has been completely unknown just 6 months ago, definitely 1 year ago. Nobody knew who he was. And that told us a lot about the state of illiberalism in Poland and what's been going on. As you can see, the difference is very, very small. We are still trying to get over it. I kind of am hoping that this session could be a group therapy session for all of us, but let me give you more context right now. About the campaign itself, as you can see, Rafał Trzaskowski was the candidate destined to win, or so we thought, supported by the government. But what has changed definitely during the campaign was the trends, what people expected. So Rafał Trzaskowski definitely not to his benefit, has shifted more towards conservatism, because we already sensed in the air that this might be the more popular ideology at this time, while Karol Nawrocki, formally independent, but of course nominated by the previously ruling party in Poland, the populist right-wing Law and Justice Party, who, of course, well, he had many scandals, but in the end, they didn't seem to matter. And I will also be happy to talk more about that later. You know the difference between the candidates. This slide is supposed to signal how small the difference has become over the last few presidential elections. So from this graph, you can clearly see we have become a really polarized community. And to talk more about this polarization, I would like to show you what the government has been like recently. So right here I have listed Polish political parties on both polarized sides, and their poll numbers add up to 50-50, which is only showing the big problem in Polish politics is either one way or the highway, really. This is, of course, a long text slide. I don't expect you to read all of it, but it only is supposed to show you how difficult it is to form a government for us right now. These parties make up the Polish government. They are divided into 3 blocks, main blocks. There is the Civic Coalition. You can actually see my party as the second one there, Nowoczesna. It's a very small party, 9 MPs. But it's only one block making up the government. We have the Third Way, we have the left, we have a few independents, but if you were to count all the parties making up the government, we count up to a shocking 12 parties. 12 parties in one government. That only shouts problems, right? When you only look at it, you know it's going to be difficult to form a government. And of course, the last almost 2 years of this democratic government, we were so happy to get. We were so happy to win the election 2 years ago. It hasn't really risen up to the expectations of the voters, because after 8 years of the previous populist government, here we come with this new hope. People have every right to expect big changes, but how can you really deliver on those changes with so many interests only in one government? That's one of the reasons, probably one of the main reasons, why the recent presidential elections went that way. So, of course, that all reflects itself in the polls and the decreasing support for the government over the last couple months. No wonder that the recent presidential election I keep coming back to was de facto a referendum on the government. And that's exactly the strategy of Karol Nawrocki, our current president, on how he won. He was saying, listen, I know you guys don't know me, I know you may not like me, but this election is a referendum on whether you like this government or not. It turned out people didn't like the government. Here I would like to start a discussion of some other trends we are noticing in Polish politics. That means the rise of illiberal parties and their support. PiS is the Law and Justice Party, KON is the Confederation Party, very far right, and KKP, I'm even afraid of describing them, they are the super far right party. But then again, it shows you that despite the Polish community being polarized, it's turning into radical right versus radical left. So both sides are finding themselves in the necessity to radicalize, and that's definitely not something we are happy about. These are some of the issues currently dividing Poland. Well, you can see it's my point of view right there, representing one side. But then again, of course, EU being a big factor in what divides us, also the approach to economy. rule of law, minorities' rights. You know the story. I'm sure that our V4 countries have many similarities in the issues which divide the community. So I'd be happy to talk more about that during the discussion. I hope this gave you some context of what was going on. And let's continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now the final country presentation is Hungary. And then we'll continue with a bird's eye view. But first, let's hear about what's going on in Hungary and what the expectations are.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you all. Thank you for coming. I'm usually a fast talker, but I will try to talk slow out of respect to our translator colleagues. Then again, I will be brief, because I think that most of you know most about Hungary, and I would like the discussion to continue with the V4. Anyhow, I'm here to talk about the Hungarian case and about liberalism, illiberalism, how the parties are doing, and you can't do that without public opinion polls. This is my professional opinion, and as a pollster, I think you are irreplaceable. So basically, the polls stand at the same level, essentially in the last 6 months. I would say TISA, the party of the opposition candidate Péter Magyar, is leading in the polls for over 6 months, I think even more. It is a considerable lead ahead of the governing party. It is a similar situation as the polls in Slovakia, I would say. But by no means a done deal, done election, and we will have elections next year. As we are talking about liberal parties here, I think we have to ask the question, which parties are liberal? But to do that, we have to say that as it stands currently, there are only 3 parties in parliament next year, which is a shockingly small number. If not the changing government, I think TISA party will bring about the doom of some other older opposition parties at the very least. And right now, the only parties in parliament are the governing party coalition. We tend to forget that these are 2 different parties together. And also TISA party with Péter Magyar, and the third would be the far right, Our Homeland, Mi Hazánk. You could argue that TISA party is liberal, and I will talk about this briefly in a moment. But basically right now I would say that the 3 parties that could be accused of liberalism are as follows. Momentum Party is a party that is currently standing at 1% following them not running in the elections, which I think if you're liberal is a bit of a shame really, but it is what it is. They decided not to run in the elections to give way to TISA, potentially to give way to some good, I don't know, candidate talks with TISA and the remaining Momentum politicians, but we don't know that. And Two-Tailed Dog Party doesn't normally announce themselves as liberal, but I would think that if we look at all the values of these parties, I would say that the Two-Tailed Dog Party is one that would be easily called a liberal party. They are all for human rights, and they are all for me, what's very liberal is municipalities, local governance, and they are huge about that. So for that and other reasons, including gender equality and so on and so forth, I would consider them liberals. And TISA party is the big question here. It is the biggest opposition party. I would say that it is a party for which most liberals vote, but it is difficult to say whether they are liberal or not. Democratic Coalition is not outlined here for a reason that they are now rebranded as a leftist party, but there was a time, I would say, where they could have been considered either liberal or at least like a pool party that joins together or wants to join together all the opposition voters. I don't think that is the case anymore, as apparent from their standings in the polls, but they are trying to go for a strong leftist image. We will see if it works or not. And when you talk about illiberalism versus liberalism, you would have to ask first, is the Hungarian governing party illiberal? Which I think is kind of an easy question. I have some things listed here that would make, in my opinion, government illiberal. But I don't think we need to argue for that, because Viktor Orbán himself adopted the illiberal term to describe their own government. Maybe he disagrees with me on the items of illiberalism, the things that make illiberalism what it is. I would say a few things are the erosion of checks and balances, the lack of media independence. We now have a project about public media independence in this last year, which shows just how terrible the situation is. Manipulation of democratic institutions, such as the election system and so on. The curtailment of civil society and academic freedom. I think we all remember, unfortunately not the start, but one of the key moments in the fight of Fidesz against the civil society would be 2017 and the Lex CEU, which successfully banished the Central European University grounds from Hungary. And also, the most important, in my opinion, nationalist and exclusionary ideology. And this is something that, to me, makes an illiberal government, and Viktor Orbán's and the Fidesz government's and the party's communications in this past decade has always been about excluding the enemy, protecting the voter, and creating a sense of community out of pure hatred. But enough of that. Let's see if, and this is the main question, if the opposition challenger, Péter Magyar, the Tisza party, is liberal. And you could go two ways. I think that, first of all, his own definition, his own words, he said, I am a conservative liberal, if there even is a thing like that. So he has called himself liberal. And as the party is basically, as in Hungarian media you hear a one-man show, you could say that if one person is deemed liberal, then everyone is liberal in that party. But is he, though? First of all, what we could say against him being liberal is that, first of all, we know that the former member of the elite circle of the Fidesz government, and this is an area in which he is attacked constantly. First of all. Second of all, he vouches to keep a large number of Fidesz's policies intact. He vows to keep the family support system. He vows to keep a number of things. He vows to keep also the low taxes, which is something that I'm going to talk about briefly in a second. But he doesn't talk about a number of issues that are missing from his portfolio, which I think a liberal politician should talk about, such as media freedom, LGBTQ rights, freeing civil society, changing the education system, and doesn't really campaign about liberal economic policies. Sorry for the translators for talking fast. At the same time, he is more liberal for sure than Viktor Orbán, although his personal friends will say otherwise sometimes, but right now, as it stands, he is deemed as more liberal than Viktor Orbán, which is already a relief, although it's not hard to be more liberal than Orbán. Liberal voters, most of them, vote for him, and I think that liberals, or just voters in general, can shape a candidate, so that might make him a liberal. He likes the private sector, as he hires often from the private sector, some professionals, experts, policy people. And finally, he generally presents as an open-minded and liberal person in the campaign, but we know how campaigns work. Finally, and this is my last slide, the current debate about taxes. We know that we have to talk about it briefly because it's a bit confusing, but what happened, and I say this especially for our foreign friends, is that a Tisza party member, a vice president, actually hinted at a progressive income tax at some event. He thought it was no big deal, but with the power and money of the governing party, you can blow up any small remark into a huge campaign, and this is exactly what happened. The Fidesz propaganda machine started talking about the Tisza tax. You might be reminded of campaigns such as in the US, the death tax, or some other occasions where a governing party or just any party used taxes as kind of a threat in the governing in the election campaign. So now Fidesz is saying that Tisza will raise taxes, which prompted Tisza to talk about a tax decrease, that they're going to decrease taxes. But in reality, what they have said, and there are some questionable leaked documents which we don't know if they are authentic or not, which do present a progressive tax reform. They present several tax brackets. They present also a luxury tax of some sorts, and so on. So where does this leave us? First of all, the most important thing is that Hungarian self-proclaimed liberals, such as us, but I'm just saying Hungarians in general are really into leftist policies, even when they call themselves liberal. In Hungary, we use the term liberal left, although we don't like it as political scientists because it's confusing, but the Hungarian opposition likes to coin themselves as liberal left. And because of this, it's really hard to say what is a liberal tax policy in Hungary, because if you ask Hungarian self-proclaimed liberals, they will say tax the rich. So it's quite different as it is in the West, and this is why it's hard to say what a liberal tax policy would be. But right now, the majority of the opposition, I think, especially the parties in their policies, they would support a progressive tax. And Tisza was clearly going to talk about progressive tax later, but now it's a bit difficult because the Hungarian opposition has a tendency to back out of policies if Fidesz attacks it, even though, in my opinion, if the governing party attacks a policy as an opposition party, you would have to go all in on that policy to establish the contrast. But that's enough from me. Basically, this is the biggest debate, the tax debate, that is going to shape the elections, among some other things, of course, such as the most recent pedophile scandal, the case of the castle of Viktor Orbán's father, and so on and so forth. But we have to keep in mind that it's really hard to pinpoint a liberal tax policy in Hungary, because it's really hard to pinpoint what a liberal is in Hungary. Maybe we will talk more about this in the presentation, or sorry, in the panel, but for now, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. And finally, after we have heard about all the 4 countries, I would like to give the floor to Lars Andrej, who can talk about all the 4 countries comprehensively as someone deeply involved, but also who has the benefit of the bird's eye view, having worked all over the world.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this excellent presentation. So tough act to follow. So yeah, the expectation now is within 10 minutes. After that, I have to leave, unfortunately. So 10 minutes, this you call it bird eyes perspective, to give some comments on, some general comments on what is going on here in the region. Not to say in Europe, not to say worldwide, maybe. So I will try it. Let me start maybe with commenting a little bit about these terms left and right and center, liberal center, whatever. I mean, you know that that is a terminology, that are terms coming from the French Revolution, so more than 200 years ago. And I mean, seeing that, I would say that was a quite successful terminology, or quite successful try to categorize, to characterize the political landscape. Since I mean that we are talking about the 19th century, so and what was going on in the 19th century, that was the time of revolution, post-revolution, what is restoration, industrialization, forming capitalistic structures, private property, poverty, and so on and so forth. Political Catholicism as well, so the question of the role of the church, mainly the Catholic Church, but the Protestant Church in Germany as well. So you see that were the big topics in the 19th century, and that was the time when we started, so our predecessors, fathers, grand whatever fathers, they started to talk about left parties, or the left, the right, and the center. And again, I mean, seeing that, it was quite successful. Then the outcome of these terms were some classical parties founded in the mid and late 19th century. So social democratic parties, so the democratic left, so to say, liberal parties, so centrist parties, pro-republican, anti-monarchy, in favor of separating church and state, in favor of a constitution, in favor of a national state as well. So it was the Liberal Party, and it was the political Catholicism, plus, so on the right, the political Catholicism and conservative parties. And then in the 20th century, and that is quite important from my point of view, we are talking about the conservative parties in the 20th century and still now. I would like to do a difference. I mean, I would like to talk about Christian democratic parties, and that is the same with the on the left hand. That was the try starting in the post-war, so post-Second War period in many Western European countries. That was the try to find a bridge between the classical conservatives and pro-European, pro-Atlantic or transatlantic, pro-democratic approaches. So it's a quite interesting thing. Yeah, and still we have that in mind. So left, right, center, and all these classical parties, mainly in Western Europe. So Social Democrats, Christian Democrats in Italy, France, Gaullism. We still have that in Great Britain, with Tories, which is a classical conservative party, and the Labour Party, and so on and so forth. The expectation that brings me to a second point, approaching now our region here. The expectation was, after the Iron Curtain came down in Europe, after the wall came down in Germany, in Berlin and in Germany, the expectation was that now we can transform, we as the West, we can transform then the political landscape in the former Eastern Bloc countries here in Central and East and Southeast Europe. That was the expectation. So, and amongst others, the German political foundations, so they are, as you know, they are many, and they are close to parties. They came then to the amongst others, to the former Eastern Bloc countries, to teach them some young politicians, the new generation of politicians in the 19th, and Viktor Orbán was one of them, by the way, and I think Fico as well. They try to teach them how to create parties, social democratic parties, liberal parties, how to form them when it comes to structure, when it comes to hierarchy, when it comes to programming, when it comes to campaigning, and so on and so forth. That was the expectation that might have, I mean, there are many differences between the countries. I'm generalizing a little bit, but you can find that in Poland, you can find that in the Czechoslovakia in the early 90s, then Czech and Slovakia after. So that was quite successful. But then and what is interesting, then the West became more and more similar to the Eastern situation, which means there was no classical, how to describe that, historical traditional party system. So that is something we are losing now in all European countries, not only here in the region. In many European countries, Great Britain might be one exception, but in my country, in Germany as well. So we are losing that, and that's why, that is my message now, that's why it doesn't make much sense to take these terms left, right, center. And I mean, all of you were mentioning that in your presentation. So you were mentioning populists, but for good reasons. You say be careful with right-wing or right populist, left populist. That's really complicated. Since that is maybe my last point now for this moment. The last point is what is populism, and what is populism as a new phenomenon combined with all these traditional terms and terminology. So populism, from my point of view, so it's a question of style, it's a question of how to behave as a politician, how to communicate, how to present oneself. That is one point. But more important is the program, the content. And here you can see that populists, many populists, and that includes Trump in the United States, that includes Rassemblement National in France, so not only here in the region. Italian case is quite interesting as well, and so on and so forth. So populism, for instance, Orbán might have this image, right populist, but for sure, and that was mentioned, for sure he's playing like Fico, like Trump, like the French, the Rassemblement National. They are playing with some how to say that, with some ideological elements who are from time to time from the left, from time to time from the right, from time to time from the center. So they are playing around with that. So they have just only a tactical relationship with the historical ideology. So that's just something to work with. So, but I mean, apart maybe from Hungary, that was mentioned as well for good reasons. Apart from Orbán, so Babiš and Fico, and in Germany you might find people as well. They don't have a very, very strong, profiled, solid ideological fundament. Quite a what is it? A solid program. Then they are playing around with some emotions. They are playing around with some terms. They are playing around with some keywords, and the idea is to win election, to gain power, and to maintain power. So that is populism, and populism is, and that is very important. Seeing the long lines, the more general lines. Populism is, if you know me, you know what is coming now. Populism is destroying the results of enlightenment and civilization. That is something which is very important from my point of view. Coming back to this point, what is illiberalism? That was here in the screen. We saw that at the screen as well. I mean, this illiberal populists, they are destroying some basic achievements of the past 200 or maybe even 300 centuries. And one is division of power, an independent legal system, independent media, press, independent of academic, of research. So again, that were points of the 19th century. The liberals came up with them, and that has been destroyed in the past, I would say even in the past decades, but more and more now and more visible in many European and Western countries. I mean, we can see that in the case of the United States. We can see that, we saw that with peace in Poland. I don't hope that we will see that with Babiš plus SPD plus motorists. Wait and see. I mean, that is a little bit, if I may give one comment on Czechia. I mean, I'm based in Czechia, and we had an excellent presentation from Czechia. That is something we had heard or have heard so in the past weeks. So from our contacts, at least from our contacts partners, we don't like Babiš, we won't vote for Babiš, but Czechia is stable enough and it will survive at least one term of Babiš, maybe even including the SPD. So the Czech SPD. I hope so, since I mean that is right. I mean, Czech, there's much control, so they don't have a 2/3 majority in the chamber. They don't, so ANO plus its potential coalition partners, they don't have a majority in the Senate. So there's the first chamber, upper house. We have in Czechia a constitutional court. We have the president, who is very much in favor of Western, very Western-minded, pro-NATO, pro-European, and so on, pro-Europe, EU, and so on and so forth. So there are many obstacles. We thought that is the case in the United States as well. I mean, for all of us, it was quite clear that Trump too, re-elected Trump, will be a problem. But I think not many expected that he tries to destroy the institutional construct or the institutional construction, institutional system that fast. So I hope Babiš won't follow the American way. I mean, there's still some tools, some options, but so I'm still hoping that we don't see that, but my trust is in between, half. So to come to an end, populism is destroying the results of a liberal, enlightened, rational history of the past roughly 150, maybe 200 years. That is the big challenge for us as liberals and for other democratic parties as well. Since, I mean, again, the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats, apart from all ideological differences between us and them, but that are parties, and I could include the Greens as well as this ecologic party, in many countries. So they are at least pro-liberal, or they are in favor of human, rule of law, state of rule of law, and separation of powers to some basic issues. So that is there's a consensus apart from all differences, but they are as well weak and weaker, and that is another lesson you can see in the past elections, in many elections, be it in Poland, be it in Hungary 20 years ago. The situation was completely different. We can see that we could see that in Czech Republic as well. So the Social Democrats, they are disappeared in France. Parti Socialiste, the Democrazia Cristiana in Italy, so they are disappearing. And that is not a good news for me as a liberal. That is not a good news either, apart from all differences. So they are weak and weaker, and we have then now in many countries, only different forms, different versions of populism. In Czech Republic, Ano, I would say, let me try to create this term, a kind of moderate populism, but this term does have sense since you have then the SPD, you have the motorists. In the case of Poland, I mean, you name that, the first round of the presidential elections in May, so you had the two candidates from the second round then, but then number 3, 4, and 5 that were extremistic, populistic, you name it, candidates. And that is a big challenge as well. So we have different versions of populism, and yeah, that is the challenge for all of us. So that are my remarks. Thank you very much for the attention. Thank you very much for being here. I think I need to leave in 3 minutes, and I will miss, I'm sure, another very interesting and inspiring panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to ask our panelists to join us on the stage. Thank you very much. And then we can continue with the debate and discussion. I think this is a very nice start of the debate. And because time is sort of pressing, I would like to ask you to keep your answers short. My first question would be that it was mentioned that there are certain differences in liberalism within the V4 countries. The V4 countries are mentioned together for the historic alliance of the 4 countries, but is there another way in which we can categorize these 4 countries together, and is that illiberalism? So is the illiberalism in one country, does it affect the illiberalism in the other country? Is there a trending effect? Is there illiberalism is pulling all the countries towards a more illiberal way? How do you see it? And I think we can start the order you're sitting in, so Andrej.
Right, thank you. Yeah, I mean, like I said during my presentation, having seen your points of view in your respective countries, obviously there are many similarities, and one way would be to blame it on the trends, worldwide trends, maybe even blame it on what's going on in the USA, right? But I feel like that would be the easy way out. And I think that we should focus mainly on our countries right here. What the Polish example has shown me is indeed how more polarized we are becoming. And having seen your presentations, I see that many same examples are happening in your countries. Whether they are influencing each other, I'm not sure. I think that what's been going on in our respective countries has been long term in the planning, you know, if I can say that way. I mean, clearly, many of the issues are remaining the same in the countries. But what I see in Poland is the approach we are taking as liberals might have been one of the reasons why we are here right now in this situation. I mean, the liberals didn't seem to be able to deliver on many of the promises, and now have to overcome many of the really disinformation about what we really want to do, right? So what our opponents are making of us is completely a different thing than we actually want to deliver. And not only we are in the situation that we have to, we would want to deliver on our vision, but firstly we need to explain what it is, because people have this wrong image of it.
Looking at it from Slovakia, clearly there is an influence of Fidesz on Slovak politics. I've heard from, I don't know to what extent this is true, that Orbán likes to think of himself as the teacher and Fico as the student. whether or not that is actually true, certainly Fico, and even more so the leader of the National Party, Danko, has expressed an admiration for Orbán. He has said that if only we had the kind of policies, the kind of control that we see in Hungary. Few practical examples of that, I think, is the narrative on Ukraine, and so this narrative of peace and Europe being for war, and we here in the Visegrad 4 will be for peace. There is a clear inspiration about anti-LGBT and anti-NGO legislation. People from Slovakia, from the governing parties, come to CPAC in Budapest. MCC has done this year, last year, a conference in Slovakia. So there's definitely a push from Fidesz northwards, and there is some absorption capacity. It doesn't get translated 100%, but there definitely is some absorption on the Slovak side.
Thank you. Andrej, you said that blaming the trends would be the easy way out. I feel that unfortunately that's the underlying principle, that's the hard truth to swallow in a way. Because the trends that we see in Central Europe are not different from what we see across the world. What is different is the starting position of those countries. So what I see there is that the societies are polarized everywhere. We've seen that in the US, we see it across the EU. What is different here in this region is really the change from post-communist countries to new members of the EU, to now, established members of the EU. But what plays a huge role from my perspective is this really disappointed hope of how quickly we will be catching up with the Western Europe. And this is what fuels the dissatisfaction of voters in Central Europe in particular. But I think what we've seen in all the presentation is that the problem is very foundational, actually. Democracy, and I will paraphrase the words of the famous former Czech president Václav Havel, makes life difficult for those who mean well and makes it very easy for those who don't. And it's just the fact that we're seeing, the democratic, liberal, you name it, the adjectives that we will use are always going to be less efficient because there's going to be more discussion. It's what we've heard in the Polish case. That's what was the case with the previous government in Slovakia that made it so easy for Fico to take over. This is the case in Czechia. This is the case about whether, TISA party is actually liberal. Those are discussions which are happening in one part of the spectrum, which are not really that detailed in the second part of the spectrum, where you just accept whatever is said and you don't have to bother with discussions and you don't have to bother with plurality of opinions. So I feel that those are the very general trends that we see all over. Just the problem with our societies is that those are still new democracies and those are still extremely vulnerable to this. And just going back to V4, I've been commenting on V4 since the migration crisis in 2015, and it's been kind of still the same message. V4 is a tool. We are countries facing similar challenges. We are starting at a similar level, but I wouldn't overestimate the role of V4 or the influence that one country has on another. The influence is there when it's useful for the politicians. And it's not influence, it's really using the relations. So of course, Babiš now is going to use the ties that he has within the Patriots for Europe with Orbán, because he's not going to have many friends elsewhere, so he's going to go there. But if he has those friends elsewhere, he was very happy to flaunt his relationship with Macron in his first term. The far-right SPD is super happy to have Marine Le Pen attending its meetings. It's not, exclusively linked to this region. It's whatever is convenient, and we've seen it always. V4 is a great tool for us, having the Visegrad Fund, having those discussions, but I wouldn't overestimate the role that it actually plays in decision-making and in influencing each other. I think the trends are much, much broader than that. Thank you.
I'll just use this one. Thank you. So, do you know what a bumper is on your car, on the front of your car? You mentioned the word influence, and from a time when Fico was in a more socialist era, like we just heard from Andrej, that he changes quite a bit in terms of ideology. But when this was a time where he was quite more of a socialist, and he was meeting this other Hungarian socialist politician who asked him about his European strategy. And Fico said to him that he looks at Orbán as a bumper, a car bumper. So whenever Orbán hits a wall in his foreign policy, Fico is going one step behind Orbán, and if the wall is hit, Fico stops. And this is how he described Hungary's influence on Slovakia. Of course, this also influences us. We are neighboring countries, and because of the Hungarian diaspora as well in Slovakia. Of course, the entire Hungarian diaspora is allowed to vote in Hungary if you also have a residence here, but in Slovakia especially, Hungarians can vote via mail. It's one of a few countries where you can do that. So that is also, I mean, a direct influence in Hungarian politics, but the fact that we are so close and there are so many Hungarians, because of this we really feel Slovakian politics. For example, when when there was an assassination attempt against Fico, we really felt that it was all over Hungarian news. Of course, the governing parties were first to jump to use this as a campaigning material, saying that this is the kind of threat the right is facing right now. There are, of course, other things. For example, we could say Czechia. ANO is a friendly party with Orbán. I mean, at least they are in the same European parliamentary group, the Patriots, even though they differ in their opinions on EU, even on Ukraine, in a number of things, on NATO. So I would say that ANO is more moderate than Fidesz, but they are working together in Europe. So this is a huge influence on us. And the fact that ANO joined the Patriots is the only reason, I would say, or one of the main reasons why Viktor Orbán could say that the last year's EP elections were a success for Fidesz, because he managed to create Patriots with ANO. Lastly, but very importantly, in Poland and the Polish influence in Hungary, I mean, PiS party, Law and Justice Party, was great friends with Orbán. They are still good friends, I would say, but although they also differ on some points. But they lost the elections in Poland. In Poland, the opposition won. Donald Tusk is now leading Poland, who used to be on good terms with Orbán. When they gave the EU presidency from Poland to Orbán in the early 2010s, I think maybe even in 2010 precisely, they did so with a friendly football match. And this is not only interesting because at the time Viktor Orbán was still seen on the field rather than only watching the games, but also because Donald Tusk and Viktor Orbán had better working relationships back then, and now they are adversaries. Donald Tusk was a speaker in the opposition campaign closing in 2021, or I think it was October 23rd, 2021, National Day of Hungary, one of the national days of many, and Donald Tusk was present here campaigning against Orbán. So definitely these relations between Poland and Hungary worsened, and I think it is key because Polish elections next time is 2027. We have elections in 2026, and I think that Donald Tusk and Péter Magyar, if there was a Tisza takeover, could work together better than Viktor Orbán and Donald Tusk can. So this is a direct influence, very important influence of Polish politics to Hungary and vice versa, I would say. And I could go on and on in this topic because I think there are a number of things that we could inspire from V4, such as in Poland and Czechia, and especially I've seen some data in Poland, the civic activity of voters, it's much higher than Hungary. We did a research among the youth 18 to 25, and in Hungary 6% of young people said they took part in the election campaign for European elections, and in Poland it was something like 40%. So our civic activity is way below that of Poland and even Czechia, I would say. So this is, for example, something that I think we could inspire from. Another very direct inspiration could be the wages, because we want we want the wages of other V4 countries because ours are the lowest, but that just goes without saying. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You mentioned something I wanted to touch on and turn the table a bit and circle back to Poland, a country where we're looking at as a sort of best practice for trying to counter illiberalism. So we were talking about illiberalism a lot, but do you think that it would make sense for liberals to be the antithesis of illiberalism, as the name would suggest? Because as Lars Andrej mentioned, ideologies don't really mean anything anymore. Many of the current illiberal politicians started off as liberals when they could define themselves against communism, and liberalism was such a good word for that. Now, can liberals rebrand, and what sort of topics they can use to counter illiberalism, if you think the antithesis to illiberalism would be more liberalism?
Well, thanks. Indeed, until just recently, Poland has been set as this example on how to counter illiberalism, how to counter populism. The last election of the president kind of took that image away, because it showed clearly that we have made many mistakes in the last 2 years and haven't really gotten full use of the chance we have been given. Now, when you ask me, for us as liberals, how could we now, in a way, maybe rebrand or bring back voters into our ideology? I have to agree with Lars, who said before that right now it matters much less on the branding of each specific ideology, because for us as liberals now it's going to be a difficult thing to actually agree with, that if we want to keep on winning the next elections, the way is not to run on this titled agenda of liberalism. The agenda is becoming much broader, much more vague, actually, because right now, because of the populists who have been in power or are in power, the way to defeat them is to counter exactly what they're saying, but it doesn't mean being in line with an ideology. It just means being anti-them, anti-populist, being the vague term democratic, right? So for us as liberals, it's actually hurtful. We cannot run on specific ideologies, but the necessity to run on these vague ideas, which are the way to counter those populists.
Andrej, I would like to continue on this question with the addition that Fico and Orbán are both mentioned as nationalists, and there was an article in the Financial Times saying that nationalist illiberals can actually join a coalition in the long term because inherently they are nationalists and they have to define themselves as opposed to the other country. The other country will pose some sort of threat, and there are some instances where Fico was using Hungary as a negative example for needing to mobilize the military or conscription. Do you think it's an exploitable problem of the illiberal coalition or semi-coalition, and that liberals could exploit on nationalism and use it against them?
The one-word answer is yes, but I think events will unfold before that comes to happen. Fico, also Pellegrini, who this week met with the president of Hungary, they keep saying that the Slovak-Hungarian relations are as good as ever they've been. Now, I would put it to you that when they say that, what they really mean is relations between the two parties, the two governments. Suppose Péter Magyar manages to unseat Viktor Orbán in April. That will be, for me, a real that test of the stability and the strength of Slovak-Hungarian relations. If they are true about what they're saying, then we should not see that kind of rhetoric return, like what you referred to. I suspect we will see that these nationalist urges will come back once there is a different prime minister. But for the time being, the reason why even not just Fico, also the National Party have been able to do that was that they've decided that whatever it is that divided Slovaks and Hungarians over the past 100 or even more years is less important than a different kind of common enemy that they could find. That could be the globalists, that could be the migrants, that could be queer people. So for the time being, they put it to rest. Whether it's through reconciliation, we will see.
And Susanna, for you, another additional question is with regards to Russia, and how do you see Russia's role is in with the V4 countries and in the relation with the illiberal politicians? Do you foresee any closer ties to Russia or a Russian agenda being pursued in the supposed Babiš government in Czechia, or do you think it's not on the horizon?
Thank you. On the role of Russia, I think this is something that's been debated heavily in the campaign. And especially the outgoing coalition was trying to highlight their strong position on Russia. They are really the kind of hawkish approach to the crisis, and they are super strict and one of the most responsive governments. They try to put that in a contrast with Andrej Babiš, who is saying that he doesn't care about foreign policy and we should focus on Czechia. And of course, even more so in a contrast with SPD and the other far left, which is not relevant anymore. But they were basically arguing that we should pursue peace at any price. And basically that means surrendering Ukraine. I think Babiš will be forced to be much more pragmatic in the upcoming month. He doesn't want to alienate most of the EU. So his number one role now is to kind of try to keep a low profile on Ukraine, but actually he has nothing to gain from going, stopping all the aid. I don't think this is going to be a direction he will want to go, but he will need to manage his coalition partners first, and this is what I see as going to be the biggest challenge for him. And we've seen it already in the first couple of days of negotiations of the new government, how these dynamics between those fairly egocentric parties are going to work. So that's on that. And a practical example on your original question on whether liberalism is the right way to fight illiberalism. What we've seen in the elections is that the most liberal party, which is arguably the Pirates and even Stan, but I would say Pirates are a better example because they did perform actually better in the elections. They are the party that traditionally argued on the most progressive and liberal thoughts. This election, they've decided to abandon that altogether, and they focused on very practical examples of what makes people's lives difficult. So it was about cost of living, it was about transportation, but it was mostly about really the day-to-day situation in housing. And that seemed to be a way, because it seems like with those big vague phrases, people get lost. You will not get new voters. You will only kind of talk to those who are already convinced. Whereas if you're tackling very practical issues, that kind of is something that can potentially attract even people outside of the bubble. But I think this is one of the biggest challenges that we will see everywhere in the world, and that is that the stronger you are on your values, the more polarized the discussion is going to be, and the less likely there's going to be a successful outcome of it. And we see this everywhere, that if there's somebody who started as a very strongly opinionated on one side, then in order to actually appease or appeal to those voters who are somehow undecided, then they are getting more and more together. And this is why basically the whole European debate is slightly shifting to the right. Like that's the reality we've been seeing for the past 10 years.
Marta, my question for you would be that we have seen in the recent polls that TISA is leading at the moment. However, we are looking for a very aggressive campaign where there will be a lot of populist tendencies, probably from all sides, which is probably not healthy. That the best way to try to beat Orbán is to out-populist him. So what do you think would be the next step in a fictional scenario where TISA wins the elections, and wins by a 2/3 majority, do you think they would shift towards a bad direction, or do you think there's hope of trying to dismantle the illiberalism in Hungary that's been persisting for a long time?
Thank you. So what you're asking is basically some scenarios of what would happen depending on election outcomes. And this is not only a Hungarian question, but a V4 question. And I prepared for myself worst and best case scenarios that could happen in exactly this situation, starting with the worst case, because let's get the fear out of the way. I think that the worst case scenario would be Orbán and Fico win the next elections, despite being runner-up in the polls in Slovakia and also in Hungary. We see that progressive Slovakia and Slovakia is leading by some 5%, and the same goes for TISA in Hungary. But the governing parties could stay in power. And that combined with ANO, well, they already won, but it's also a matter of the coalition that ANO forms. Now we see some green omens regarding this, because if they collaborate closely with the far right, which is something that they will have to do likely because of the mathematics of the elections, there is the threat of what is called the tail wagging the dog. This is also a Hungarian saying, but I think an international saying, and this was, for example, something that Hungarians were saying about the Liberal Party in Hungary when the Socialists and the Liberals were on government. Unfortunately, the tail was not wagging the dog. It would have been much better, although I was a child at the time, so it was not up to me. But that's one thing. So if ANO forms a coalition with the far right, and Fico stays in power, and Orbán stays in power, I think that will be a huge problem. And then there's elections in Poland again, and the PiS party could come back basically after 4 years. Also in this regard, the presidential elections were a bit scary just recently. And if this turned out, that would mean that the V4 is an illiberal bloc in Europe. There's also a good case scenario, a best case scenario, and that would be, I think, basically that is up to one single factor for the most part. That is Viktor Orbán and Fidesz losing the elections in 2026. And this is the only thing I think that could set off things into the good direction in the V4. Because first of all, if Viktor Orbán loses, that will be a huge relief for Hungarians after 16 years. And that's the more obvious part. In these past 5 years, Viktor Orbán has tried to build himself up as an international important figure, basically someone who forms or shapes the world. And he did this by being harmful and disruptive in European politics, in global politics in general. And I think he succeeded in this. And I think if he would lose in 2026, that would mean Fico loses his bumper in foreign policy. That would also mean that Babiš's EP ally in the Patriots weakens, which could end their convenience marriage or disrupt their convenience marriage, because in reality, Babiš and Orbán disagree on a number of things. And also in Poland, we will have elections just 1 year after Hungarian elections, and PiS is getting stronger, but if the Law and Justice Party, PiS, would lose a strong ally in Hungary, in Viktor Orbán, that could really, I think, affect how the elections are going in Poland in 2027. And there could be the best case scenario, which would mean that, well, ANO is a difficult situation. ANO will be in power for a while, but you've seen that the far right didn't perform as well in the elections. So ANO is more center right, and that is the best of the worst case scenario that could have happened. So we could have a more liberal V4, and we could have it within 2 years, and I think that would be an excellent scenario. But the key to that is beating Orbán. And this is the question you asked originally, how to win against Orbán, or sorry, not how to win against Orbán, but how to fight illiberalism. And it is through beating Orbán in the elections, which is obviously not up to us first and foremost, because we are not politicians, or I'm not a politician, but this is the key to, I think, having a more free, more Europe-oriented, more liberal Visegrád 4.
Thank you very much. We are slowly running out of time, but I have one final question, and I would like you to answer in 1 sentence. And that's going to be a hard question, because my question to finish on a proactive tone is, what do you think the best practices are to avoid the worst case scenario that Márton mentioned, of a wholly illiberal V4 bloc, what best practices exist on fighting illiberal tendencies?
Well, I'm going to give an example of one election in 2023, and that is to go beyond your own ego in terms of not trying to push your specific agenda, but realizing that sometimes you need to, unfortunately, of course, sacrifice some of it in order to make a bigger, more common, more responsible, big opposition bloc, maybe, and keep together.
I do get asked, why is it that Progressive Slovakia is leading the polls? I think the best answer to that is discipline, professionalism, and not losing hope.
I'd say maybe less talking about liberal ideas and more living it and doing it, because I feel like the best way forward is really having debates, having free media, having the platforms to discuss that, and actually having people who are active on the political scene, but in civil society as well. So I feel this is what makes democracies resilient, and this is what eventually is the best tool we have to fight illiberalism.
Thank you. What I say regarding this, I think Hungarian case is a bit different, and this is why I say that you have mentioned before that you have to essentially surrender some of your panels, some of your key points in hopes of being accessible to a more broader audience in the elections. And I think that Hungary tried and failed with that in 2022. So I would say that if you have a problem with an illiberal trend in Hungary or in Europe, what you can do in Hungary is that you actually be more persistent on being liberal, saying you are liberal, and being good at politics, being good at communications. And if you want the world to not be, or want Hungary to not be liberal, you have to be liberal and be a good politician and win the elections, or at least get into parliament, because as it stands right now, there are no de facto liberal parties getting into parliament in 2026. Hopefully that's not the case, but you have to have that voice in parliament. And I think to do that, first of all, you only need 5% of the votes, but to do that, to get those votes, I think you could do with a strong liberal campaign, a strong liberal communications. And I'm still looking for parties, no, not looking for parties, I'm waiting to see a party in Hungary that owns up to that and succeeds. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for keeping the time. It made my job much easier. Now we have to conclude our lively discussion and interesting topic. We'll go on a break and continue at noon with a cultural panel in Hungarian. So if you need, there are still interpretation machines. And all it remains for me is to thank our esteemed panelists, Andrej Schulz, Andrej Prenke, Lars Andrej Richter, Márton Schlanger, and Zuzanna Stuszlikova. Thank you very much.